My tea had long since gone cold, a forgotten casualty on the small table beside my favorite armchair. It was the same armchair my late husband, Robert, and I had picked out together 30 years ago, a sturdy, floral pattern piece that had witnessed decades of our shared lives. Now, it sat in a small, neat, but unfamiliar living room, a room that smelled of fresh paint and new carpets, not the accumulated scent of memories. This was my home now, a two-bedroom apartment I had chosen for its quietness and its view of a small park. It was pleasant. It was safe. But it was not the home I was supposed to be in. It was not the million-dollar penthouse with sweeping city views, the one I had purchased with the entirety of my life's savings. I stared at the framed photograph on the mantelpiece, the only one I had brought with me from the old house. It was Robert and me, on our wedding day, young and blissfully unaware of the winding path our lives would take. He had such a kind smile, a smile that promised steadfastness and protection. He had protected me, always. He had worked tirelessly to ensure I would be secure, that our future would be comfortable. We had built a small fortune together, not through glamour or high-flying careers, but through sheer, unglamorous persistence and a shared belief in prudence. We saved every spare penny, invested wisely, and lived below our means. We built a fortress of financial security, brick by painstaking brick. I always believed that fortress was built to protect our family, to be a legacy for our only son, Mark. I thought that by providing for him, by ensuring he never felt the sting of financial worry that we had known in our early years, I was fulfilling my duty as a mother, and Robert's legacy as a father. I had no idea that the fortress I built would be the very thing my own son would use to imprison me, and that its final, most luxurious turret, a stunning penthouse apartment, would become the stage for my greatest humiliation. It happened on my 70th birthday, a day that should have been a quiet celebration of a life lived, but instead became the day I was unceremoniously thrown out of my own home by my son and his wife, Tiffany. The irony was so bitter it coated my tongue. I, Eleanor Vance, the woman who paid for every inch of that marble-floored palace in the sky, was deemed unworthy to inhabit it. They had told me it was for my own good, of course. Everything they did was always framed as being for my benefit, a twisted justification for their relentless, escalating greed. But as I sat there in my new, sterile apartment, the silence broken only by the ticking of a clock, I replayed every conversation, every transaction, every warning sign I had so willfully ignored. The fortress had been breached not by an outside enemy, but by the very person it was designed to shelter. And as the cold reality settled in my bones, a different feeling began to bloom in the barren landscape of my grief, a cold, hard resolve. They had taken my home, they had taken my money, and they had tried to take my dignity. They had underestimated me. They saw an old woman, a grieving widow, a soft touch. They had forgotten who I was before all of this, the bookkeeper who tracked every cent, the partner who helped build an empire from nothing. They had forgotten that I still held the deed. And I was about to remind them. Robert and I started with nothing but each other. That sounds like a line from a sentimental novel, but in our case, it was the literal truth. We married in 1970, with a handful of wedding gift money and 2 entry-level salaries. I was a junior bookkeeper at a local textile company, my mind a natural ledger of credits and debits. Robert was a newly qualified civil engineer, his passion lying in bridges and foundations, in creating things that would last. Our first apartment was a cramped, third-floor walk-up with a temperamental radiator and neighbors who argued about everything. We didn't mind. It was ours. It was in that small apartment, over countless lukewarm dinners, that we forged our financial philosophy. We saw our friends buying new cars on credit and taking lavish holidays they couldn't afford. We, instead, opened a joint savings account and created a budget so meticulous it would have made a corporate accountant weep. 50% of our combined income went to living expenses, 30% went directly into savings and investments, and 20% was for everything else: clothing, an occasional movie, a rare dinner out. It was a strict regimen, but we saw it as a game we were playing together, a challenge to build a future. When I got a small promotion, the extra $100 a month went straight into our investment portfolio. When Robert received his first bonus, we didn't celebrate with a shopping spree, we used it to open a low-cost index fund. I remember the excitement, sitting at our small kitchen table with the paperwork spread out before us, feeling like we were planting a tree that would one day grow to shelter us. Our first major victory was the down payment on our house. It took us 5 years of relentless saving. It wasn't a large house, just a simple 2-story brick home in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood. But it had a yard, and a sturdy roof, and it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. The day we got the keys, Robert carried me over the threshold, and we danced in the empty living room. That house became our world. We painted every room ourselves, planted a garden in the back, and paid down the mortgage with an almost religious fervor. Every time we made an extra payment, I would circle the date on our calendar, a small monument to our progress. We paid off that 30-year mortgage in just under 15 years. The day we sent the final check, we opened a bottle of sparkling wine, a rare indulgence, and toasted to our freedom. We were debt-free. It was around that time that our son, Mark, was born. He was the center of our universe. All our hard work suddenly had a new, more profound purpose. We wanted to give him everything, but more importantly, we wanted to teach him the values that had served us so well: hard work, prudence, and the quiet satisfaction of building something for oneself. But perhaps, in our desire to shield him from the struggles we had faced, we made things too easy. He never saw the budget spreadsheets, or the worn-out shoes we kept wearing for another year. He only saw the comfortable home, the stable life, the security that we had bled and sacrificed for. He saw the fruits of our labor, but never understood the toil that went into cultivating them. He grew up smart and charming, but with a different set of priorities. While Robert and I found joy in a zero-balance mortgage statement, Mark found joy in brand names and the admiration of his peers. We thought it was a phase, that he would eventually understand the quiet power of what we had built. We were wrong. This misunderstanding, this fundamental difference in what we valued, was a crack in the foundation of our family. And when he met Tiffany, that crack would be pried open into a chasm. Mark met Tiffany during his final year of university. He brought her home for a weekend, and my first impression was one of polished perfection. She was beautiful, dressed in an elegant, but understated style that screamed expensive. She had a firm handshake, looked me directly in the eye, and complimented our home with well-chosen, articulate words. She was a law student, she said, with ambitions to work in corporate mergers and acquisitions. Robert was charmed by her intelligence, her seeming drive. I, however, felt a strange, unsettling chill. It was in her eyes. While her mouth smiled and said all the right things, her eyes were constantly scanning, assessing. When she looked at our comfortable, slightly worn furniture, her gaze didn't hold the warmth of someone appreciating a loved home, it held the cool calculation of an appraiser. I tried to dismiss it as my own overprotective foolishness. This was the woman my son loved, and I had to love her too. The small financial requests began not long after they graduated. It was subtle at first. Mark called one day, his voice laced with a carefully constructed casualness. He said Tiffany's old car had finally given up, and it was causing her a lot of trouble getting to her new, prestigious internship. They had found a reliable, second-hand sedan, but were just a few $1,000s short on the down payment. "It's an investment in her future, Mum," he'd said, a phrase I would come to hear many, many times. "Once she's a partner, this will be nothing against my better judgment." I wrote the check for $3,000. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a graduation gift of sorts. A few months later, another call. Tiffany had some lingering student loan debt, and the interest rate was, as Mark explained in great detail, absolutely criminal. It was holding them back from being able to save for a deposit on an apartment. He framed it as a smart financial move. "If you could just help us clear it, Mum, we could get ahead so much faster. It's just throwing money away on interest otherwise." He was using my own language, my own logic, against me. I knew about compound interest, and he was right, it was wasteful. So I paid off the $12,000 loan. The pattern was established. Each request was logical in isolation, presented not as a handout, but as a strategic investment in their future. It was help with the security deposit and first month's rent on a chic downtown apartment they insisted was necessary for networking. It was a $5,000 loan to buy a new wardrobe for Tiffany so she could fit in at a high-powered law firm. The word loan was always used, but there was never any mention of repayment. When Robert passed away after a sudden heart attack, my world shattered. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me every moment of the day. Mark was there, of course, but his grief seemed to be overshadowed by a sense of newfound responsibility, not for me, but for the estate. He and Tiffany were helpful in a detached, administrative way, more concerned with the paperwork and the value of assets than with the gaping hole in my life. The requests for money paused for a few months, a brief period of feigned respect for my mourning, but then they resumed, now with a new, more urgent edge. It was no longer about getting ahead. It was about maintaining a lifestyle that was already far beyond their means. Tiffany had made partner faster than anyone expected, and Mark had landed a sales job in a luxury goods company. They were earning good money, but they were spending it faster. The requests became bolder, and my refusals became weaker. I was lonely, and the fear of pushing my only son away was a powerful motivator. I was throwing money at the problem, hoping to fill the silence Robert had left behind, hoping to purchase the affection and proximity of my family. I was paying a premium for a cheap imitation of love, and the cost was escalating with every passing month. The birth of my granddaughter, Lily, changed the dynamic entirely. When I held her for the first time, a tiny, perfect bundle wrapped in a soft pink blanket, my heart melted in a way it hadn't since Mark was a baby. She had Robert's eyes. In her, I saw a second chance, a pure and innocent soul to pour my love into. And Mark and Tiffany knew it. Lily became their most effective tool of manipulation, the final key that could unlock any vault. My generosity, which had once been a choice, now felt like a prerequisite for access to my own grandchild. "We'd love for you to babysit on Friday, Mum," Tiffany would say, her voice as smooth as silk over the phone. "But the car's been making a funny noise, and I just don't feel it's safe for Lily. We've been looking at a new SUV, something with better safety ratings." The implication was clear: no new car, no seeing Lily. I paid for the $20,000 down payment on a luxury SUV. "The schools in this district just aren't good enough," Mark would lament, bouncing Lily on his knee when they visited. "We want her to have the best possible start in life. But the homes in the good school districts are so expensive." I watched my granddaughter's innocent face, and I wrote a check for $50,000 to help with a down payment on a house they never ended up buying, the money disappearing into the black hole of their lifestyle. The wedding had been the first major red flag, a grand affair that cost more than my first home. I had offered them a substantial sum, $20,000, which I thought was incredibly generous. Tiffany had looked at the check, then at me, with a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "That's a wonderful start, Eleanor," she had said, as if I were a junior fundraiser at her charity gala. The final bill for the venue, the designer dress, the 5-course meal for 200 guests came to over $80,000. They reluctantly allowed me to cover the difference, framing it as a loan they would pay back once they were settled. The repayment was, of course, never mentioned again. After Robert's death, I had remained in our family home. It was too big for me, filled with ghosts and memories, but I couldn't bear to leave it. It was the last place I had been with him. Every scuff on the floorboards, every chip in the paint, told a story. It was my sanctuary. But to Mark and Tiffany, it was just an asset. "Mum, this house is a lot for you to manage on your own," Mark began one Sunday afternoon, after a lunch I had cooked for them. "The upkeep, the property taxes. You're rattling around in this huge place," Tiffany chimed in, her tone dripping with false concern. "And the stairs, Eleanor. We worry about you on those stairs." They spoke of my well-being, but their eyes kept darting around the room, cataloguing the value of the solid wood furniture, the silver candlesticks on the mantelpiece, the prime real estate the house itself represented. I knew my finances down to the penny. Thanks to Roberts and my diligent investing over 40 years, my portfolio was worth a significant amount. The house was paid off and had appreciated tenfold. I was, by any measure, a wealthy woman. I wasn't a fool. I knew what they were doing. But with each passing year, my loneliness grew, and my resolve weakened. I was paying for their time, for their attention, for the privilege of being a grandmother. Each check I wrote bought me another dinner invitation, another weekend with Lily, another temporary reprieve from the crushing silence of my life. I was caught in a trap of my own making, funding the very lifestyle that made my own simple existence seem so contemptible in their eyes. They lived in a world of glamour and expense that I was bankrolling, while I continued to live the same modest life Robert and I had built, a life they viewed with a kind of pitying disdain. The resentment began to curdle inside me, a slow-acting poison. But I didn't know how to stop. I was afraid that if the money stopped flowing, so would the love, however conditional and transactional it had become. The proposition, when it came, was presented not as a request, but as a brilliant, all-encompassing solution to everyone's problems. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, delivered over a meticulously planned dinner, at a restaurant so expensive the water was probably imported from a mythical spring. Mark began, his voice earnest and full of gravitas. "Mum, we've been thinking a lot about the future. About family. About all of us being together." Tiffany picked up the thread seamlessly. "We worry about you, Eleanor. Being all alone in that big house. And we are so cramped in our apartment. Lily needs space to run around, a place where her grandmother is right there with her." Every day, they painted a beautiful picture. A multi-generational home, where I would be cared for in my old age, where Lily would have her grandmother's wisdom and love just down the hall, where they could finally have the space they needed to live up to their potential. Then came the centerpiece of their plan. Tiffany slid a glossy brochure across the table. The cover showed a gleaming glass tower piercing the sky. The pinnacle, it read in elegant silver font. "They are building a new luxury condominium downtown," Tiffany said, her voice hushed with reverence. "And there's a penthouse unit available. 3 bedrooms, a den, a terrace with a panoramic view of the city." I stared at the artist's rendering of a vast, sterile living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. It looked like a hotel lobby, cold and impersonal. "It's perfect," Mark said, his eyes shining. "A room for you, a room for us, a room for Lily. No more stairs, 24-hour security, a pool, a gym. You'd be safe, comfortable. We could take care of you." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew what was coming next. I asked the price, my voice barely a whisper. Tiffany named a figure that made the air leave my lungs. $1.2 million. Plus condo fees that were more than my old monthly mortgage payment. I started to protest, to say it was impossible, but they were ready. They had a plan. A neat, tidy plan that involved the complete liquidation of my life. "If you sell the house," Mark explained, leaning forward conspiratorially, "that should cover a good portion of it. The market is incredible right now. And then, if you liquidate some of those old stock holdings, the ones that are just sitting there not doing much, would have more than enough just sitting there. Those old stock holdings were the seeds Robert and I had planted 40 years ago, the bedrock of my security. They were the tangible result of a lifetime of deferred gratification. And they spoke of selling my home, Robert's home, as if it were as simple as selling a used car. We could all live together, Tiffany repeated, placing her manicured hand over mine. Her touch was cold. One big, happy family. It's the perfect investment, Eleanor. Not just in real estate, but in us. In family, the word investment was the hook, and they knew it. They dangled Lily in front of me like a precious jewel. Think of the memories you'll make with her, they said. She can come and have breakfast with you every morning. You can read to her every night. The emotional blackmail was suffocating. I felt cornered. On one side was my lonely, quiet life in a house full of memories and ghosts. On the other was this glittering, seductive promise of family, of belonging, of not being alone. They were selling me a dream, and the price was everything I had. For weeks, I agonized. I walked through my house, running my hands over the familiar wallpaper, sitting in Robert's armchair, trying to hear his voice, to know what he would do. Part of me, the logical bookkeeper part, screamed that this was a monumental mistake. But the other part, the lonely widow and grandmother part, was so desperate for the dream to be real. I pictured Lily's laughter echoing in those high-ceilinged rooms. I pictured having a purpose again, being needed. The fantasy was more powerful than the reality of my balance sheets. With a heavy heart and a mind clouded by hope, I finally agreed. I convinced myself it was the right thing to do, the logical next step for our family. It was a decision born not of financial sense, but of a profound and aching loneliness. I was buying my way back into my family, and I was about to find out just how little my investment would be worth. The process of dismantling my life was brutally swift. The real estate agent Mark and Tiffany hired was a young, aggressive woman who spoke in buzzwords and saw my home not as a repository of 40 years of living, but as a product with great bones and excellent curb appeal. She staged the house, removing my comfortable, worn furniture and replacing it with sterile, modern pieces rented for the occasion. My family photos were taken down from the walls, my personal history erased to create a blank canvas for potential buyers. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching strangers walk through, commenting on the floor plan and discussing how they would renovate, how they would tear down the walls that had contained my entire adult life. The house sold in a week, for a staggering amount that brought me no joy. The closing felt like a funeral. I signed the papers with a trembling hand, handing over the keys to a place that held the very essence of my being. The money, a vast sum, was transferred to my account, where it sat for only a few days before being moved again to purchase the penthouse. I was shrewd enough about one thing. I insisted, with a firmness that surprised even myself, that the deed to the penthouse be solely in my name. It's my money, I told Mark, it's my property. This is non-negotiable. He and Tiffany exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance, but agreed readily. Of course, Mum, Mark said with a placating smile. It's for your security. We totally understand. Their easy capitulation should have been a warning bell, but I was too caught up in the emotional turmoil of the move to see it for what it was. A minor concession in their larger victory. Moving into the penthouse felt like arriving in a foreign country, where I didn't speak the language. The space was enormous, cold, and echoed with every footstep. My guest room, as they called it, was larger than my old master bedroom, but it was sterile and white, with a generic hotel art painting on the wall. The view of the city was impressive, a dizzying panorama of lights and traffic, but it felt distant and alienating. I missed my garden. Tiffany took charge of the decorating with a terrifying zeal, spending my money with breathtaking speed. We need to furnish the place properly, Eleanor, she would announce, brandishing catalogues for designer Italian sofas and Scandinavian light fixtures. It's an investment in the property's value. My beloved floral armchair, the one Robert and I had chosen, was deemed frumpy and dated. I fought to keep it, a small, desperate battle for a piece of my past. Tiffany finally acquiesced with a sigh of theatrical martyrdom. "Fine, Eleanor. We can put it in your room, I suppose. But it really doesn't go with the aesthetic." It felt like a consolation prize, a relic of a forgotten world confined to my small corner of their new empire. The initial weeks were a blur of deliveries and decorators. My role was simply to be the signatory on the credit card slips, the silent funder of their vision. The dream they had sold me, of a warm, multi-generational home, quickly evaporated. I rarely saw Mark, who was always busy with work. Tiffany was constantly out at luncheons, charity events, or shopping. The promised family dinners were rare, and when they did happen, the conversation revolved around their social lives, their career ambitions, and their plans for the future, a future in which I felt increasingly like a silent investor rather than an active participant. Lily was my only solace. She would sneak into my room in the mornings, her small hand in mine, and we would read stories together in my old, frumpy armchair. Those moments were my only return on $1 million investment, and they were becoming painfully scarce, as Tiffany enrolled her in a whirlwind of extracurricular activities. I was a tenant in my own home, a spectator in my own family. The fortress I had bought was not a home, it was a cage, albeit a beautifully furnished one. The day it all shattered was my 70th birthday. I had mentioned it a few weeks prior, hoping for perhaps a small family dinner, maybe a cake. I didn't want anything extravagant. I just wanted to feel seen, to be acknowledged. Mark had mumbled something noncommittal, and Tiffany had smiled vaguely and said, "Oh, we'll have to do something special for you, Eleanor." I woke that morning with a sense of quiet anticipation. I put on my nicest dress, a simple blue silk that Robert had always loved, and went into the kitchen, expecting perhaps a happy birthday, or a cup of tea. Instead, I walked into chaos. The vast open-plan living area was swarming with strangers. Men in crisp white uniforms were setting up a portable bar. Women with headsets were arranging towering floral displays. The smell of industrial-strength cleaner mingled with the scent of lilies. I found Tiffany in the center of it all, directing two men who were moving furniture. "Tiffany, what is all this?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. She barely looked at me, her eyes flitting over a clipboard. "Oh, Eleanor, good, you're up. It's a madhouse, isn't it?" she said, her tone bright and brittle. "We are having a little get-together tonight, a little get-together." There were at least a dozen people setting up for what looked like a corporate gala. "Tonight?" I said, my heart sinking. "But Tiffany, it's my birthday." She finally stopped and gave me her full attention, but her expression was one of mild annoyance, as if I were a child pointing out a triviality. "Yes, I know," she said impatiently. "But this is important. It's a networking event for Mark. Half the senior partners from my firm will be here. We couldn't possibly reschedule." She then walked over to a designer shopping bag sitting on the kitchen island and pulled out a pashmina shawl, the color of beige. She thrust it at me. "Here. Happy birthday. I thought this would be nice for you." The shawl felt cheap and synthetic in my hands. "The party is at 7, she continued, already turning her attention back to the caterers. "It's probably best if you just say a quick hello to a few people when they arrive and then have a quiet evening in your room. It's going to be a very late night, a lot of loud music. Mostly a younger crowd, you understand." I stood there, speechless, the cheap shawl clutched in my hand. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sickening. I was not to be the guest of honor at my own birthday celebration. I was to be an inconvenient piece of decor, to be briefly acknowledged and then hidden away. I was being dismissed, erased in the home that I had paid for with the blood, sweat, and tears of my entire life. I retreated to my room, the sound of their party preparations a dull roar in my ears. I sank into my old armchair, the one they despised, and I felt the tears I had been holding back for months begin to fall. Later that afternoon, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Lily, my sweet granddaughter, holding a piece of construction paper. On it, she had drawn a picture of the two of us, holding hands, with a crooked, wobbly sun smiling down. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she whispered, handing it to me. She threw her little arms around my neck and gave me a hug. In that moment, her simple, pure love was a stark contrast to the calculated cruelty of her parents. It was the only genuine gift I received that day, and it was the thing that broke my heart completely. I was being thrown out, not just from the party, but from my own life, by the very people I had given everything to. And as I held my granddaughter's drawing, the last vestiges of my naive hope turned to ash. The party began promptly at 7, and the sounds of it seeped under my door, the clinking of glasses, the throbbing bass of some fashionable, soulless music, and waves of loud, confident laughter. I was a prisoner in my own bedroom, an exile in my own home. I had not emerged as Tiffany had suggested. The thought of parading myself for a quick hello before being sent back to my quarters like a disobedient child was more than my pride could bear. I sat in the dark, in Robert's armchair, the cheap beige shawl draped over the back of it like a shroud. The drawing from Lily was propped up on my bedside table, the only point of light in the room. Around 9 o'clock, driven by a need for a glass of water, I crept out of my room and down the short hallway toward the kitchen. The main living area was a sea of bodies, people in expensive suits and cocktail dresses, all strangers to me. I tried to be invisible, keeping to the shadows along the wall. As I neared the kitchen, I overheard a voice I knew well, Tiffany's. She was standing with a small group near the wine fridge, holding a glass of champagne, looking radiant and powerful. "The place is absolutely divine, Tiffany," a woman I didn't know was saying. "You and Mark have done wonders with it." Tiffany let out a light, tinkling laugh. "Thank you. It was a labor of love. We knew this was the one the moment we saw it. It has the perfect energy for what we want to build." She said. "Our home. Not a word about me." Then, another guest, a man with silver hair, gestured vaguely down the hall toward my room. "I thought Mark mentioned his mother was living with you." Tiffany's smile tightened for a fraction of a second before becoming perfectly smooth again. "Oh, yes. Eleanor. It's a temporary arrangement, really. A way for us to help her transition after she sold her big, old house. It was getting to be too much for her. We managed to convince her to put her money into something more practical, like this place. It's a much better investment for her, and it allows us to keep an eye on her." Her tone was condescending, filled with a pity that was more insulting than outright malice. Another woman in the group laughed softly and said, "You're a saint for taking that on. Managing an elderly parent can be so trying." Tiffany waved her hand dismissively, a gesture of faux modesty. "Well, what can you do? It's family." And then she leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper I could still hear perfectly. "Between us, it took some delicate handling. She's from a different generation, you know. Doesn't quite grasp these kinds of finances. But we got there. Now she's tucked away safely, and we have the perfect place for our life." The words hit me like physical blows. Tucked away safely. Delicate handling. Doesn't grasp finances. They weren't just ungrateful, they were actively painting me as a doddering, incompetent old fool to their friends, taking credit for my wealth while diminishing my existence. The narrative they had created was that they were the saviors, and I was the burdensome parent they had so generously taken in. All my sacrifice, all my generosity, had been twisted into this grotesque lie. A cold, clarifying rage washed through me, extinguishing every last ember of love and obligation I felt for them. The humiliation of the morning coalesced into a single point of diamond-hard certainty. This was over. I slipped back to my room, unnoticed. My hands were no longer trembling with hurt, but with a steady, furious energy. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name, Margaret. My oldest friend, a retired lawyer, as sharp and unsentimental as they come. I hadn't spoken to her much since moving into the penthouse, embarrassed by my own foolishness. Eleanor. Is everything all right? She answered, her voice full of concern. The dam broke. I told her everything, the words pouring out of me in a torrent. The penthouse, the money, the constant demands, the lies, the birthday party. When I finished, there was a moment of silence on the line. Then Margaret said, her voice dangerously quiet, that ungrateful, manipulative little. Tell me one thing, Eleanor. Whose name is on the deed to that penthouse? Mine, I said, my voice now as cold as hers. Only mine, good, Margaret said, the fury evident in her tone. Then it's your house, your rules. You are not their tenant, Eleanor. They are yours. Do not let them make you forget that for one more second. You are not overreacting. You are being robbed, not just of your money, but of your dignity. You need to take it back. Her words were the validation I desperately needed. She was right. I was not the doddering fool Tiffany described. I was the woman who had built the fortune they were so carelessly spending. I outlined my plan to Margaret, my voice low and determined. She listened, offering sharp, practical advice. By the time I hung up the phone, the melancholic widow was gone. In her place was the bookkeeper, the investor, the matriarch who was about to audit the family accounts and call in every debt. The next morning, I rose early. The apartment was a wreck, littered with empty glasses and discarded napkins. The stale smell of champagne and perfume hung in the air. Mark and Tiffany stumbled out of their room around 10 o'clock, looking hungover and pleased with themselves. Morning, Mum, Mark said, squinting against the light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Quite a night. I think we made some great connections. Tiffany was already on her phone, scrolling through social media posts from the party. The photos look amazing, she murmured. Everyone is raving about the apartment. They moved about the space as if I weren't there, their proprietary air more pronounced than ever. I let them have their coffee. I waited until they were both sitting at the huge marble island in the kitchen, basking in the afterglow of their social triumph. I, on the other hand, had showered and dressed in a crisp blouse and tailored trousers. I felt calm, focused, and powerful. I walked over to them, holding a single, folded piece of paper in my hand. Mark, Tiffany, I said. My voice was even and steady, devoid of the pleading, emotional tone they were so used to hearing from me. It made them both look up, a flicker of surprise in their eyes. We need to talk. I unfolded the paper and slid it across the marble countertop towards them. It was a formal notice of eviction, which I had downloaded from the state's official court website and filled out before they had even woken up. It gave them 30 days to vacate the premises. They stared at it. Mark read it, then read it again, a look of utter incomprehension on his face. Mum? What is this? Is this a joke? Tiffany snatched the paper from him. Her face went from confused to flushed with anger in a matter of seconds. What the hell is this, Eleanor? She spat, her voice losing its polished veneer. This isn't funny, I am not joking, I stated calmly, looking directly at her. This property is in my name. I am the sole owner. You are my tenants, and your tenancy is terminated. You have 30 days to find alternative living arrangements. Mark stood up, his face pale. Mum, you can't be serious. We live here. We're family. This is our home. No, Mark, I corrected him, my voice as sharp as broken glass. This is my home. You have been living here at my expense and my invitation. That invitation is now revoked, Tiffany erupted. After everything we've done for you. We let you live here. We've been taking care of you. The sheer audacity of her statement almost made me laugh. Taking care of me? I asked, and for the first time, I let the years of resentment show. Let's talk about that. Let's do an accounting, shall we? I am a bookkeeper. After all, I began to list the figures from memory, my voice clear and precise. $3,000 for your first car. $12,000 to pay off your student loans. $83,000 for a wedding you couldn't afford. $50,000 for a down payment on a house you never bought. $20,000 for your safe SUV. Hundreds of thousands spent on decorating and furnishing this apartment. And finally, the $1.2 million of my life savings used to purchase this roof over your heads. So please, Tiffany, tell me more about how you've been taking care of me. They were silent, stunned by the cold, hard numbers. They had never seen my generosity as a ledger, only as an endless, flowing river. I had just built the dam. You threw me out of my own home on my 70th birthday, I continued, my voice low and dangerous. You belittled me to your friends. You treated me not as a mother, but as an inconvenience and a source of funding. The bank of Mom is now permanently closed. Mark started to plead, his voice cracking. Mum, please. We are sorry. We didn't mean it. We can talk about this. There is nothing to talk about, I said, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. You have 30 days. I will arrange for a mediator to schedule supervised visits with Lily. She is the only reason I will have any contact with you going forward. But you, Mark, and you, Tiffany, are no longer welcome in my home. Your belongings need to be removed by the end of the 30-day period, or I will have them disposed of. Tiffany's face was a mask of pure hatred. You'll regret this, you ungrateful old woman, she hissed. The irony was so profound, so absolute, it was almost poetic. No, Tiffany, I said, turning to walk back to my room. You are the one who will regret underestimating me. The following 30 days were the longest and most difficult of my life. The atmosphere in the penthouse was thick with a toxic silence, broken only by bitter arguments between Mark and Tiffany that I could hear through the walls. They tried everything. Mark attempted tearful apologies, invoking my love for him and for Robert's memory. Tiffany tried threats, mentioning lawyers and elder abuse, a claim so preposterous it was laughable, given that I had the bank statements to document every last cent. I remained unmoved. I communicated with them only through written notes left on the kitchen counter. I spent most of my time in my room with the door locked or went for long walks, rediscovering a city I now saw through different eyes. I hired a lawyer, on Margaret's recommendation, who handled all the formal communication, reinforcing the eviction notice and making it clear that any legal challenge would be fruitless. The most painful part was Lily. She was confused and sad, sensing the terrible tension in the air. I arranged to take her to the park or the museum by myself, creating a small bubble of normalcy for her amidst the chaos. During those outings, I explained nothing of the conflict, focusing only on being her grandmother, on showering her with the unconditional love she deserved. I saw the fear in Mark's and Tiffany's eyes as they realized I was serious. The panic set in when they understood their lavish lifestyle was about to come to a screeching halt. They had been living so far beyond their means for so long, propped up by my fortune, that they had no savings, no safety net. On the final day, I watched from the window as they loaded their belongings into a moving truck. They looked defeated and small. There was no final, dramatic confrontation. They left the keys on the counter and walked out of my life, leaving behind an echoing silence in the vast, empty space. The silence, however, was not lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of freedom. The penthouse, however, was tainted. It was a monument to my foolishness and their greed. I couldn't stay there. I put it on the market immediately, and just like my old house, it sold quickly, even turning a small profit. I didn't need the money, but the symbolic victory was satisfying. With the proceeds, I didn't look for another grand statement. I looked for a home. I found a lovely, bright two-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained building with a strong sense of community. It had a balcony that overlooked a park, where I could watch children play and dogs chase balls. It was comfortable, manageable, and entirely mine. I bought it outright and used the remaining funds to reinvest, securing my own future on my own terms. I also set up a trust fund for Lily, an ironclad account that she would gain access to when she turned 25. It was my true legacy, a way to provide for her future without a single dollar ever passing through her parents' hands. My life found a new rhythm. I reconnected with Margaret and my old friends. I joined a book club and a gardening society at my new building. I started taking watercolor painting classes, something I had always wanted to do. I was no longer Eleanor, the lonely widow, the family ATM. I was just Eleanor, a woman rediscovering herself. One sunny afternoon, as I was enjoying a cup of hot tea on my new balcony, my phone rang. It was a gentleman from my building, a kind-faced widower named Arthur whom I had spoken with at a community meeting. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "It's a beautiful day out. I was wondering if you might like to join me for a walk in the park." I looked out at the green trees and the blue sky, at the life teeming below. I thought of the cold, sterile view from the penthouse and the silence of my old house. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face. "Yes, Arthur," I said. "I would like that very much." I had bought $1 million penthouse, and in losing it, I had finally purchased something far more valuable, my own life.